Thanks for your patience. We just wanted to wait a few minutes, and we were waiting for our final speaker to show up, and he should be arriving shortly. He's here already. Great, perfect. So my name is Julius Arscott. I'm an activist in the Workers' Action Movement. I'm also an executive board member of OPSEU Region 5, and welcome to today's conference. We called today's conference because, as everyone in this room knows, we have some a major battle ahead. And the workers' movement needs to organize and mobilize in order to challenge the Ford agenda. And so we've put together two panels. The first panel will begin shortly, and it is entitled Wages, Jobs, and Justice. I'm not going to go into the speakers because Elizabeth Vice is our chair, and she will introduce all the speakers. And then in the afternoon, or later in the afternoon at 4 p.m., we have another session entitled Whamming It to the Bosses, Smashing the Status Quo. So enjoy, and we look forward to your participation. Thanks.
Okay, folks, welcome again. As Julia said, my name is Elizabeth Vice, and I'm a retired member of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. And as most of you in this room know, we'll probably be hitting the bricks any time now. Woo! So hope to see you on the picket line. I'm retired, but I will be there. Okay, so as Julia said, this is a WHAM conference, and the first panel is Wage, Jobs, and Justice, and we have 4 speakers, and our speakers will go in this order, and they have up to 15 minutes each. Our first speaker will be Brother Sam Cheadle, who is the past OPSEU LBED campaign organizer, LCBO worker, and WHAM activist. Our second speaker will be Anna Ainsworth, who is Vice President of OPSEU, it's Ontario Public Service Union, Local 560, participant of the 2017 College Faculty Strike. Our third speaker will be Rajean Hoilett, who is the former president of Ryerson Students' Union and chairperson of CFS Ontario. And our fourth speaker will be Brother Barry Conway, IWW member and former candidate for OFL President. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Sam. I will give you a 3-minute warning.
Thank you very much. So greetings, sisters, brothers, comrades. Thank you for coming today to our web conference. We have some great participants who agreed to speak in these panels, and some great speakers and activists lined up, so looking forward to a great conversation. As Elizabeth mentioned, I'm from the Liquor Board Employees Division and a member of WHAM's steering board. So what is WHAM exactly? Just quickly, we were founded in 2017 by workers in the Ontario Public Service Employees Union. We work around 5 key issues. Number 1, mobilize the membership to give more power and resources to our locals. Number 2, no concessions bargaining, no more 2-tier shops, which is all too common in OPSEU. Fight the attack on our pensions, benefits, and wages. Number 3, create a more democratic, accountable, and transparent union and build it from the bottom up. And number 4, commit more resources and support from OPSEU HQ. Something that is that we are criticized for using the union's resources for our organizing, which is not something the case, but it's more about directing resources to campaigns and solidarity struggles that are much needed. And this ties into number 5, solidarity for workers everywhere. We had a presence at the rally against the Cup W smear campaign against B'nai B'rith in North York. This is part of our Palestinian solidarity work, but it's part of the aspect to have solidarity with other union members and other organizations that are under attack for their activism. So we know about this in OPSEU. We're rank and file trade unionists who believe OPSEU shifted to the right in this sense. We know members are struggling. We know the labor aristocracy continues to hold on their privileges and pursue outright class collaboration and strategies with the boss. In this sense, we're committed to building an organized left wing and a class struggle caucus within OPSEU and all unions. So it's not specific to OPSEU, but it's a rank and file trade movement that we want to spread to other organizations to allow that space to activists to speak up and actually get involved. So this often includes looking the bureaucrats directly in the eye and challenging the regressive policies. This also includes contesting elections on a political basis, whether it's in our locals, at convention, in other sections of the union, whenever we're able. So we've found, it's all too common for careerists and political thugs to be found in the major political parties and corporations, but we need to purge these bad actors from our unions and create real rank and file fighting bodies again that actually go on the line and advocate for workers, right? So, as we know, there's much at stake in Ontario in terms for the working class as a whole, right? We're still recovering from the attacks of the Harris years. We've hobbled along with cutbacks, rising high-interest debt, increasing privatization of public services over the last 15 years of Liberal Party rule. And now the other twin party of the ruling class, the Progressive Conservatives, are in power. So what have we seen so far? $100 million cuts to public schools, cheap populist gimmicks, 10-cent gas reductions that never materialize, $1 beer that actually won't come out, that costs taxpayers money, strike breaking, right? At QP 3903 at York. Criminal concessions to social conservatives in terms of the sex ed curriculum, which is actually a student safety issue, fundamentally. And then we come to the attack on Toronto City Council, city democracy, ostensibly to pave the way for the sell-offs of the city's billion in public assets, right? With a smaller, streamlined council, you're going to get less opposition, say, if you want to download the TTC or the TCH, Toronto Community Housing. These are services that need upkeep, but instead of investing in them, the ruling Conservatives are very much positioning themselves to slash and privatize them, right? And this also very much includes the moves to slash the hard-fought and won gains of Bill 148. So 15 in fairness, equal pay for equal work, even sick days, which are a big thing to workers at Tim Hortons, at Metro, even at the LCBO where I work. We didn't have any paid sick days. We would have members being put on these attendance management programs for calling in sick 5 times. Now we have 10 sick days where the boss can't act you for a doctor's note, and the first 2 are paid. But discouragingly, I find when I speak to workers in a lot of most precarious environments, they either don't know about these things or they're having trouble getting to realize this. So the lack of enforcement is already leading to workers not realizing these rights, and then we have basically the Conservatives come out and say they plan to cut the bill, and the media basically says it's done. So this is not for certain, and I think other panelists are going to speak on this, in that it's still law that $15 will be going in January 2019. So, this also includes the bungling of renewable projects and leaving Ontarians exposed to millions of dollars in lawsuits, right? So what are the potentialities of an effective fight back? We cannot necessarily rely on the parliamentary actions of the NDP, although they have actually stepped up and at least engaged in some direct actions inside the legislature. And we can't necessarily rely on occasional favorable newspaper editorials to defeat the coming attacks that are coming on our unions, communities, and workplaces. We feel this must be done with mass action, coordinated strikes, to basically bring down the Ford government and his cronies to their knees. And if we wait until the next election to defeat this right-wing neoliberal government or mitigate the damage, the damage is going to be that much worse if we sit back and do nothing and fundamentally don't challenge these coming attacks in a real way. And this goes in with showing leadership of the next generation and not making the same mistakes Labour necessarily did with Harris, where general strikes were called off in favor of an electoral solution, utterly demoralized the membership, and the PCs gained another majority, and we have another more and more austerity, right? So we're currently circulating a resolution for an emergency convention in the OFL to coordinate mass action against the coming attacks. And if you can get your union or your community group to endorse this, it would be very much appreciated. Let us know. We're going to compile lists of endorsers and gain momentum as the attacks increase. So, what is the current Labour leadership saying? Well, our members voted for Ford. We shouldn't provoke confrontations. Oh, I love this one. We can convince PC backbenchers to vote against their leader. Big coup d'etat that some of these savvy Labour bureaucrats are working on. I don't know how well it's going, but so we don't necessarily get much of the sense there's a fight back. Labour Council is talking about organizing our locals and getting members ready, and yes, we're obviously doing that, but without the move toward mass action and a coordinated organizing approach to confront this government head on, members aren't necessarily going to feel like they have an open avenue to get involved, or we're serious in our desire to fight back. So that basically kind of encapsulates WHAM and kind of where we're at in terms of, I think Barry Weisler on the second panel will speak more about the militant workers movement and where the fight lies. But in terms of LBED, so we're the Liquor and Board Employees Division of OPSEU, and I'm an activist that basically comes from those ranks. I was kind of a poli-sci graduate. I found myself working at the LCBO for part-time, and then it steadily became full-time, and I took on full-time union work. So we have a large female membership. We're very precarious in many respects. OPSEU as a whole has a majority female membership, but we're one of the most precarious shops in OPSEU, in that we have a lot of two-tiered work, massive casualization of labor. This is upwards of 70 or 80% of the membership. And it's a feminized casualization of labor. And there's been very much a number of tiers created in LBED over the years. So we're under the constant attack of privatization, cuts to our CA, and currently there's actually many forces aligning to piece up this billion-dollar crown corp. There's a corporation called Alcana in the form of Liquor Depot. They run large-scale chain liquor stores out west, excuse me. And they recently registered lobbyists at Queen's Park to get in on the Ontario market. We already have a Loblaws Companies Limited that's quietly became the third largest liquor distributor in Ontario. This is through their various substitutes. And we're going to see a push soon for standalone private liquor stores. What does this mean for our membership? Well, they're saying, well, no one's going to lose their jobs. You can just reapply at these private liquor stores for minimum wage. So taking a $10 an hour pay cut and losing our access to OB trusts and all the other benefits that come with being a sector of BPS, these are currently under threat, right? So, and our division is not immune from the seeping bureaucracy of OPSEU and kind of the right-wing approach. But there are some hardworking activists that keep up the fight. We've had a wild ride over the last year and a half. We've been fighting off major attacks to our CA in the 2017 bargaining round and switching to a single grid, which had its benefits and drawbacks, but we lost our Sunday overtime, which meant upwards of a $10,000 a year loss, and for some members, and affecting work-life balance, right? And then that was an arbitrated decision that a lot of members are still bitter about. They feel OPSEU led us there and our division didn't do enough. Whether that's the case or not, there's been no clarity over it necessarily from leadership of either division or OPSEU about what exactly happened. It's kind of left for members to discern themselves. So, weird things have happened. Like as mobilizers last round, we were told to stand down in the face of a contract that OPSEU didn't like, right? We squeaked by with a 50% ratification vote, which is very low in terms of, with a very low turnout. And consequently, I mean, mobilizers were basically paid to stay home for 2 weeks so we didn't go to the stores and basically give our honest opinion. It was a very weird situation, but it's part and parcel of kind of the games OPSEU and other bureaucratic trade unions like Unifor, who just left the CLC. I don't want to crap on OPSEU all day, but that's where we're coming from in terms of our fight. But I'm sure rank and file activists could speak onto their issues in their own unions or otherwise, or their organizations or otherwise. With this, we're going to the next round, cleaning up this mess. And we're working on, as we organize our members, to fight another round. But we're not going to be able to do it alone. And what I'm emphasizing to the privatization committee and leadership in our divisional is that our success will ultimately depend on how we are able to coalesce our forces and develop a united front in battling off these attacks, which will affect lots of other areas of the OPS, of the BPS. As organizations are being pushed to contract out and privatize. So we can't do this alone, and the class level left wing, that's part and parcel of the work that Workers' Action Movement does within our unions, and having solidarity with any workers that are on strike and any organizations that are under threat by this current government is part of the approach we'd like to develop. And I see this tying into our fight at the Liquor Board Employees Division in terms of our ability to effectively to fight back. So I won't take the rest of my 2 minutes. I'll pass it over to my comrade here, Anna, and thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting inviting me to talk. As you've heard, I'm a college faculty member from Seneca College, and I'm an activist in my local who's recently stepped up to an officer position following the strike. So I'm going to start off with sort of a short history of our strike, the lessons we've learned and where we are right now and how that fits into the bigger picture. Our division, colleges, 24 Ontario colleges, we bargain collectively. In our sector, 2/3 of us are precarious contract workers. Of those precarious contract workers, only one category is unionized with OPSEU. 2 other categories of workers are not unionized at all. So we have a very divided workplace, both in terms of full-time employment, which is the minority, and contract, and then among contract employees, some contract employees have slightly better conditions than others because at least they have access to benefits and things like that. So it's a challenging workplace in that sense. When we first were, the mobilization leading up to our strike was really incredible, and I'll talk a little about that. But even with the incredible mobilization that we had, circle back to that later, I really feared we would not get a strike mandate. I thought that our membership was too conservative, too status quo driven. I thought that those who are actively involved in their locals very much are full-time employees who are comfortable, who have decent wages, good conditions, good pensions, and no real reason to push back. Those who are contract workers in the locals have not been actively involved in the locals, and then we have categories of contract workers who are not unionized. So I really didn't anticipate a strike vote. We did get a strike vote of 68%. We're not supposed to say which college voted how high, but my college voted much lower than the average. Going from there, I anticipated a challenge of mobilizing our members. The strike was something remarkable. It really challenged a lot of our culture. It changed it. It switched, it invited solidarity between members in a way that I've not seen in our workplace before. The issues we went on strike for were primarily over the propensity of contract precarious work in our system, where every 4 months folks don't know if they're going to be reemployed. Every 4 months. It's a terrible way to live, as I'm sure many folks in this room are familiar with. We have no control in our workplaces. So colleges are run by boards of governors, not by academics or students even, so there's a real loss of control, and over time we've lost more and more control over things, including academic decisions that should be resting with faculty. So we fought against precarity, for full-time work for our folks, and for academic governance, and also for academic freedom, because unlike universities, colleges had not had academic freedom. So these are our 3 big issues. Of those, the precarious work argument resonated surprisingly well outside of us. As I was just chatting with someone here, our strike came at a moment when there had been enough mobilization around precarious work in Ontario that people were starting to be aware of the scope and scale of this monster. And so when we went on strike over this issue, people listened. They paid attention. We had, I'd say, shockingly positive news coverage for having stopped colleges. I mean, that's 24 colleges, that's hundreds of thousands of students, right? A lot of angry parents. And yet we had very positive media coverage by and large. I mean, obviously there were a lot of critical articles, but having paid attention to media coverage of strikes and labor activism for a while now, I was very surprised by the tone. So there was a moment that clearly didn't emerge out of thin air. There had been enough mobilization, there had been enough information sharing through other workers, other locals, other sectors to make clear that this issue is a issue we all share. We went on strike for 5 weeks, which was also unanticipated. It was our longest strike in our sector. The longest we'd ever been on strike, we've been on strike twice before, was for 3 weeks. And we had not anticipated that we could exceed 3 weeks. Even though the College Employer Council with whom we were negotiating was intransigent, we still imagined stopping the colleges would really apply a lot of pressure. One of the reasons we were out so long was that in week 3, at the very beginning of week 3, the College Employer Council forced a ratification vote. They had the right to do it once. They chose to utilize that right on an offer that had concessions in it and had addressed none of our major issues. Our faculty, our members stepped out. 95% of them voted. 86% rejected that offer. It was absolutely And in fact, it was an online vote, which we were a little afraid of. We were afraid of inconsistencies, we were afraid of all sorts of things, but apparently it led to much greater participation than we would have had it been an in-person vote. So that was a surprise as well in terms of approaching this issue. Hours later, legislation was tabled to force us back to work. Hours later. Literally, we got the announcement at 11:40. By 6 o'clock that evening, the legislation was already tabled. The Assembly sat over the weekend. It was an emergency session to force us back. We were back at work on Monday. So not even an opportunity to go back to the table. Ostensibly, the two sides went to the table for about 2.5 hours, and then that was the end. So we went back to our workplace with nothing changed and facing forced arbitration. Out of the forced arbitration, we actually did get a win. We won academic freedom, which we did not expect to win from an arbitrator, a concept that is completely new to our sector. And it's one that we're still trying to sort of wrap our heads around how to implement it, how to use it. We're currently encouraging our members to use it, to advocate for labor in the workplace, to inform our students of what's going on and to keep them informed. So we're playing around with that, what that means. The other pieces that we got out of the arbitration were a task force. The task force was supposed to, well, was in the process of dealing with complements, so the ratio of full-time to contract work, and academic government. So our other two big issues were being ostensibly handled by the task force. A task force that most of us on the ground were very unhappy with because it had a massively broad mandate. It included way too many stakeholders, including parents and students. We didn't think it was appropriate that parents and students should be determining our labor rights, but we had it. It was our only mechanism. On the day the new government was sworn in, they canceled that along with every other order in council. So our task force is now defunct and done. And of course, Bill 148 was the other piece that we had really rallied around, and we had a letter of agreement in our collective agreement as part of our settlement that meant that we had 1 year to implement Bill 148 into our collective agreement. And then we'd be going to arbitration to decide how that would work. So we actually got a shortened timeline. The legislation, I believe, says 3 years. We managed to negotiate. We managed to get 1 year to get it implemented. That committee stalled. The way that the colleges chose to interpret the provisions of equal pay for equal work was to take the 3 categories of contract work and bring the other 2 categories that are not unionized to the wages of the category that is unionized. We argued, and will continue to argue, that they should have all been normalized with full-time faculty. So the implementation of the equal pay for equal work, the colleges claim occurred, we disagree vehemently. So that is an ongoing issue, but of course, as you know, if we lose Bill 148, we lose the capacity to argue that further. So it's very much something that's near and dear to what we're doing right now, and there's slowly a sense of looming threat. I do want to talk a little more about sort of the mobilization strategies because I think they were incredibly productive and worked really well in a very conservative workplace. And I say that with all love for my colleagues, but college faculty by and large are not a particularly radical bunch. And certainly full-time faculty who had the political power in their locals are on average 50 plus. They're close to retirement, they're facing really good pensions, they don't have a lot of impetus to be activist. So mobilization was a very important piece, and mobilization started 2 years before we actually were in bargaining. And it started by, so one of the strategies that our bargaining team developed was the creation of an advisory committee made up among, so one whole advisory committee made up of contract workers only, who advised our bargaining team. And there were representatives from all the 24 colleges, as well as the 24 college presidents, local presidents obviously. So we had a separate caucus of advice coming from our contract workers, which was really important because it meant their issues and their voice was actually being really well represented at the bargaining team level. The other piece of mobilization that was really remarkable was that we had some really great leadership. In particular, J.P. Hornick, the bargaining team chair, was and is and remains a remarkable leader in our division who went out to every single local 24 colleges multiple times to visit our GMMs, to talk to our members, to visit our LEC meetings, to inform everyone what was going on. And JP is wiped out. But JP set a really high bar for what good leadership looks like. Going to the folks, talking to the folks, listening to the folks, and then taking that back. So we had remarkable leadership in that respect as well, and I think that's a very important piece. We also had incredible solidarity during the strike. And as I said, there was a division in our own local, and all the locals as well, around contract, more steady, secure workers, the full-time, and contract, who tended to be younger workers, who tended to be people of color, who tended to be folks who had not had a chance to get in because our sector had not been hiring very much since Harris decimated it in the 90s. So we had a whole slew of faculty, 2/3, who were effectively excluded. On the picket lines was where the older faculty finally started listening and seeing their colleagues. Even in my own department, there was this divide between full-time and contract, where they had their own little clique and club and socialized on their own, and then there was the rest of us. I am now full-time myself, and I sort of identify more with the younger cohort. We have worked very hard to bridge that gap generationally in our own department, but also in our local. And walking the line with these folks, hearing what it actually is to live precariously, to not know if you're going to be employed, to have low wages, to have such a level of constant insecurity, really was revolutionary for some of our other folks, and it built solidarity within our locals as well. And that was, I think, one of the most important outcomes of the strike for us. Other things that were very effective was that the 24 locals they bargain together, but by and large they have worked autonomously of each other. The strike, again, as part of the mobilization campaign, generated lines of communication between the different locals and officers and stewards between the different locals, and we started sharing resources, strategies, organizing events together in ways that we had not done in the past effectively, and so many of those lines of communication remain active. Having said so, our membership is fairly demobilized. It was exhausting getting back to work and trying to finish off a semester without getting paid for any overtime to do it. We really didn't catch up till the end of summer semester, or the winter semester goes into the summer. So we are now really struggling to reactivate our members, especially around some of the struggles that we're facing. Bill 148 is the one we're pushing folks to mobilize around now, but ideally we want to mobilize around the broader austerity measures that are just over the horizon. And I have a sense that they're going to be as bad, if not worse, than the Harris years.
3 minutes.
Thank you.
You got that right.
Yeah. So that's a challenge that we're facing in our own locals and in our division, is to mobilize our own members again. We've seen it happen. We remember what it feels like now to get them back out and to get feet on the ground, to get them coming out to events. We had QP303. We're on the same campus as the campus that I'm at is also at York campus, so we showed a lot of solidarity. We would come out to their events, and because they were there for us most days, we had solidarity from the many unions at York University. It was remarkable to see that kind of solidarity. Our events, our rallies were attended by the broader labor movement, and our teachers, who had not perceived themselves as workers in a labor movement, started to see themselves as workers in a labor movement because of that solidarity. So that modeling of solidarity worked to teach our teachers what solidarity actually looks like. And I think that's something that was a very important thing for many of our people. So I'm going to end there, but I think that's my biggest takeaway is how to model solidarity, how do we engage in solidarity, because we need to be allied and we need to be working in cohort and massively so going forward.
Thank you, sister. Brother Hoilett.
Myself? Hello. So my name is Rajean Hoilett. It's like complicatedly written down, so it always gets sort of messed up. But thank you so much for inviting me. Just a little bit about myself before I jump in. I was, as mentioned, a former chairperson of the Canadian Federation of Students Ontario. I first got involved in this sort of work through the Ryerson Students Union. I served there as the president and as the vice president of equity. Right now I'm a social work student at Ryerson, and since leaving sort of the elected positions within the student movement, I've dedicated a lot of my time in food justice work and in doing that kind of organizing. I was really excited to come here. Actually, I love this space. Like, I feel like a lot of sort of grassroots campaigns that I've been a part of often get to use this space. And so I'm here because I really care about the work that you folks are doing, and I see how it contributes to the work. As somebody who lives outside of labor unions, who lives outside of the labor movement proper, I appreciate the work that you folks are doing in pulling our labor movement further to the left and further or closer to people and real issues. When I received the invitation to talk about wages, jobs, and justice, to be honest, the thing that stood out to me and the thing that I wanted to spend the most of my time here talking about is justice. And I think that there's been a lot of allusions to what's happening now with the Ford government, and we're seeing a very clear erosion of the democratic institutions that exist here in this province. But I would say that that has not started with Doug Ford, that existed for over 10 years with the Liberal government. Of just placating workers, of just placating our social movements, about offering conversation about what our issues were without ever acting on them. Yeah. And so we now get to see exactly what the government's intentions are before they carry out their intentions, and I think that is still just as damaging, but I think that we should not kid ourselves to think that this is something that's new and that's something that's now becoming a part of our reality. In fact, it has been a long-standing condition of living in the city, of living in this province, that precarity is just the norm, and people are forced to. I've heard a lot of allusions to our memberships being a little bit more conservative than we would hope to, but I think that comes from the fact that people are reaching for the lowest hanging fruit. That's all that we've been given in the last decade, and what else do you hope for if those are the victories that you're going for? And so I think activists like us have an incredible job to not just get people organized or get people plugged in or get people on the picket lines, but raise people's expectations about what they deserve, about what our quality of life needs to look like. When I was organizing the student movement, I think that was the first thing that I was sort of faced with. We were trying to have a conversation about free tuition fees and faced with a membership who didn't think that was at all possible, who didn't even think that we should be having a conversation about freezing tuition fee increases, that thought that we should really focus on what was real and ask for more grants instead of loans, and very low-hanging fruit there. And those conversations didn't line up with the experiences that I was having in my classrooms. They didn't line up with the way that I know that people actually felt, but I think it's because they didn't have that backing. They didn't have the confidence to say, I actually deserve this, this is what is due to me, and a group of people or a structure to be able to go to have that confidence validated and to be able to organize to win. And so I think that we should not think about our memberships as less radical or as not being there at the table. I think that there is definitely a lot of challenges that exist in approaching the way that people are living their lives, but deal with the real issues are that people are actually struggling to be able to afford the roof over their head. People are actually struggling to be able to afford rent. People are food insecure. They're not meeting all of the meals that they have for their day. And thinking about how we make sure that people are well-resourced to be able to have all of those kind of things. When I got involved in food justice work, it offered me a very different insight. I'd been petitioning for years to stop increases in tuition fees, to advocate for more representation in democratic institutions. But when I got involved in food justice, the conversations were very different. They weren't like, how do we set up a petition? They were, okay, we know that people are hungry, we know that most people are on campus at this time, or we know that most people in this community are returning home at this time. Let's set up a community lunch and invite people to come cook with us and try to feed as many people as possible. And I found that in that very different style of organizing, we were meeting the right people, the people that we were hoping to see come to the table and sign a petition around tuition fee increases were coming because they were actually hungry and they were coming for a meal and would join us in a conversation about all of the other things that were going on. And so I think that kind of organizing, at least for me, also like was way more motivating. It was way easier to wake up early in the morning and say, yo, we're gonna make a free breakfast for these people, knowing that I'm not relying on a government. I'm not relying on Ford, or at the time it was President Shawn Coilette at Ryerson, now it's Mohammed Lashmi, but not relying on these powers that be or these structures to be able to deliver wins. What we did in that organizing was shift the power away from employers, or shift the power away from the people that hold power within our institutions, and back towards people, to say we actually have the capacity to feed people. We have the capacity to be able to take care of our community and to take care of each other. And so for me, that's what justice looked like. And I would pose the question for all of you to very tangibly think about, what does justice look like? Does it look like entering negotiations with people, or does it look like making sure that people have the services or the supports that they need to be able to move forward? Because if that's what it looks like, if it's a little bit different, I would encourage you to think about how you're using all of your energy most effectively to meet that goal of justice. Because for me, that's what justice looks like. For me, justice looks like raising the floor for all workers. Through being involved in the student movement and sort of my activism followed, really started to happen within the Fight for 15 and Fairness campaigns. And I saw that campaign is about raising the floor. It's about recognizing that there are solidarity movements between folks that are unionized and folks that are non-unionized, recognizing that there's just power in community, and that our outreach can be to those spaces, and going to community spaces and making sure that people are activated, and having that conversation. When we started the campaign to raise the minimum wage, we were talking about, I think it was $14 at the time. In an hour, because people are seeing that but people are being way more aspirational when we go out to whomever. People, they're like, actually, what about a living wage? I've been hearing that about that. Now, what about a $19? That they are champions of this issue. When they started, they were active opponents, right? And so it isn't about where the democratic institutions will follow. They've always been behind. They're regularly behind. And being able to show that there's power in community, that people have an expectation for what their livelihood will mean that everybody else will need to catch up and follow suit. I think that when we're thinking about justice, we also have to think very strategically about, like if we're having a conversation about raising the floor, very strategically to think about who's on the floor, who is living within the margins, and where are we not seeing them represented. Oftentimes when we enter these spaces, I think I could easily say I'm the youngest person in the room. And so where are our young workers? How are we offering mentorship opportunities? If you come to this space, who are you coming with? Who are you bringing into the room? How are we making sure that more people are being involved and being included? How are we having the real conversations that Black, Indigenous, queer and trans folks, folks without homes, folks that are engaging in sex work, are some of the most marginalized workers in our communities? And how are we taking the resources, what you mentioned just now, that there's people within the membership here at OPSEU that are upset that you're using OPSEU resources to be able to do this kind of work. That's completely beyond me, because the conversation shouldn't even be there. We should be thinking about how we're using labor resources. We should be thinking about how we're using the resources that exist within these labor unions that are incredibly privileged within social movements to support people and to put food on people's plates that aren't here. To make sure that those folks can come and do the organizing, that they can run union drives, that they have a level of trust. I think that we also have to be honest, that there's been an erosion of trust in the labor movement amongst rank and file workers, amongst community members. When I started getting involved in this kind of stuff, my mom, she's gonna see this. Gosh, she's on Facebook. Sorry, Mom. My mom's a personal support worker. She works like double 12-hour shifts in hospitals. She was first represented by QB. She was in a shop steward role there. When she started to raise issues about racism within her workplace, and folks within her workplace went after her, her labor union wasn't there. Right? Because they didn't want to have that conversation. They were like, you know what, not enough people are trying to bargain or pay dues around race issues within the hospital, and so this is not the issue that we're going to champion. And when she was no longer the shop steward and when she lost her job, she didn't have those folks to be able to go to. And so we have a whole sector of people with real power, with real energy, with real issues, the issues that we're talking about in this room that never get represented in this space, often because they never come on their own, because there's this erosion of trust. And so we have to think strategically and honestly about how we rebuild that trust. And I think that we do that by responding to people's issues, by putting forward less asks for people and providing more resources and more answers for people at the door. It starts with our union. It starts here in these spaces. I often say, like, it's very easy to point fingers at the Ford government. It's very easy to look at other folks. But who are we electing to leadership? If it's often just white older men, then I think that, like, the problem that we're talking about at the government level exists here within our labor unions, within our labor councils. I'm like rambling, but I'm gonna get through this.
No,
All of this is all of this is really important. I also think that, like, we need to connect back to local issues. Right now we're in the middle of a new municipal election, and the only thing that people are talking about is Doug Ford. I'm helping out a candidate in Toronto Centre, and in the riding that we're working in, at 650 Parliament, there was an electrical fire that burned down the building. Over 1,000 people are still without places to live. We're not talking about that. There are shootings in places like Regent Park. We're not talking about that. Everywhere that amongst voters, amongst people that we're having conversations with, people are asking us about Doug Ford because that's what the media attention is on. And so I think that it's important for our movements, like the media is not going to focus on the issues that are relevant to us. It's important for our movements to refocus our efforts and to be about local campaigns. We need to return to these areas, especially with a municipal election going on. And I think that it's important to have this conversation about critical connections over critical mass. I do a lot of organizing around anti-Black racism, and I think about this a lot in my work. As Black folks, we represent about 3.8% of the population. And so as a part of our survival, we can't think about having mass rallies of people, of thousands of thousands and thousands of people on the ground. And instead, a lot of the focus on is like, who are the people in each community, who are the people that can help us do the mobilizing, who are the people who know what the issues are, and making those connections and starting to move forward from there. Because that's where trust is built. That is how we move forward. That is how we've seen the most success. That's how we're seeing success with movements like the Fight for 15 and Fairness. It's about, like, identifying those leaders, making sure that people have an opportunity to be supported, and that we're not just focusing on, like, leadership on an executive, but, like, leadership in community. That is all that I have to say. Sorry.
Thank you, brother. Okay, Brother Conway.
So some of the things that I was going to touch on have already been touched on and said way better than I could ever say it. Well done, Holly 3. So I'll probably keep mine short and sweet. So my name's Barry. I'm from Hamilton. I'm with QP Local 5167. I'm also with the IWW. We're just forming a brand new branch there. And as mentioned on the things that went out, is a former candidate for the OFL presidency. And that run for presidency was solely to do a campaign on bottom-up unionism and to support frontline activists. And it came out with 17% of the vote. Maybe it'll be a bit more with Unifor out at the next convention. Maybe I'll get up to like 25% and we'll challenge the chair again. But part of what I was going for there is we need to empower our frontline folks, and we need to challenge the leadership, and we need to highlight the campaigns in our communities that are taking place. The OFL put a lot of work into the Make It Fair campaign, but all that really was piggybacking on the 15 and Fairness campaign. Bill 146 and those improvements to the labor laws, they weren't achieved by the OFL. They were solely achieved by 15 and Fairness. Because labor doesn't hold weight as labor used to. We don't hold the weight to go there and push demand saying we represent 1 million organized workers. No, we represent 1 million unorganized workers, and they know that. But when 15 and Fairness goes there and lobbies and pushes, the numbers they represent are fully organized numbers. So how do we get behind that campaign and try not to put that spotlight on, oh, OFL did a great job, oh, organized labor did a good job. You mentioned supporting, you know, struggles that are taking place. In Hamilton, we have a rent strike.
Yeah.
East Hamilton rent strike.
Yeah.
So power to those folks there. Huge shout out to the Hamilton Tenant Solidarity Network that has been organizing that has created class consciousness within those towers there, that has empowered the people to take the lead and put that struggle on. That has empowered direct action. They have taken buses to Ottawa where they brought their demands to CLV, who is the owners of the place, and took a busload of folks down to the owner's mansion. He has 2 of them, while being tailed by police. But how, if we're not doing the grassroots work, how do we support it? I've been pushing through CUPE to start looking at how do we create strategically logistical centers and using our resources to provide things that are open, not just to CUPE members, but to all frontline folks. And I think that's one of the things that the OFL needs to start doing, is starting to recognize that we are not the leaders, but we are a resource that can be there for the leaders in our community, and that we don't hold any partisan. You know what? Unit 4 left, and if Unit 4 starts a campaign, fuck it, we get behind it, because that's the right thing to do at the time.
Right.
If 15 and Fairness starts a campaign, we get behind it. If there's a rent strike, we get behind it. But how do we do that? How do we have things that are just already there? So part of what I've been working on is, let's look at renting, you know, storage units all over Ontario, and just packing it with things that anybody can use free of charge, regardless of affiliation, and we don't care. If it's going towards a progressive movement, it's there. We'll obviously have things like fire barrels and wood for labor strikes, but what are things that other groups need? Maybe they need projectors, maybe they need sound systems, maybe they need a popcorn machine so they can run more family-friendly community events. We need to hear from the folks, and we need to start filling these and having them in strategic places, and then using our resources to get it there for folks. Because you can ask, but if you don't have a vehicle to get it there, then we need to provide it. So labor needs to start taking a more inclusive role in how do we achieve these things. Yeah, I think you folks might hit most of what I was going to hit at, but like, how do we go about building that grassroots solidarity? I also think too, as an IW member, direct action gets the goods. A lot of that becomes direct action comes through confidence building, and that comes through training. So I think there needs to be a broader conversation of what direct action is. A lot of folks will look at it as like, oh, it's people overtaking taking a street. It's not. It's a phone zap. It's all wearing a pin to work and showing that solidarity. How do we start getting that, and how do we start doing training that actually isn't, I mean, CUPE and all these other places are famous for these, you know, you go to a conference and then you get like an hour training on something. It doesn't give you the tools to actually leave with the confidence to go do stuff. So we need to start looking at who has the knowledge and bringing them in, looking outside of our ranks. If they're there, great. If not, start bringing in the proper people and doing it more expansive training and offering it to outside of just our membership, but to community groups as well. Because we're not going to achieve anything without that coalition building. And again, it's using those resources through our dues to actually looking at what's the best bang for our buck. And that is building a collective with everybody and it's supplying our resources around. So when you have folks like that have been on this panel that are in the real shit, you're right behind it. And it's not trying to take the lead on it. It's not creating a Make It Fair campaign to get behind 15 and Fairness. It's letting 15 and Fairness lead and putting the resources behind it. And those are the conversations we need. And those are the demands that we need to have as workers that are unionized to push towards our locals and have it out there. Yeah, there was a few other things I was going to cover, but I think other people said it way better than I ever could, and I'm not going to repeat repeat what other folks said. So that's all I got.
So before we move into the Q&A, I will ask if there's any announcements that people would like to make. Julius?
Hi folks, so I just wanted to announce a couple of events. I noticed that there's some OPSEU folks in the room, so I just wanted to remind you that we have a membership meeting, a Presidents and Activists meeting that's happening here in this room on Thursday, October the 18th. This is a Region 5 initiative, so the Region 5 board members were involved with putting this together, and it's going to focus on labor and the Ford agenda. We're going to be going into President's meeting union-wide shortly afterwards, and we want to go to that meeting with a plan, because we know that the leadership of the union has their ideas about how they want to tackle Ford, and many of the activists, particularly those of us in Region 5, have a slightly different opinion on how we have to challenge things. So come out to that. That's going to be on Thursday, October the 18th. And also on October 23rd, there's going to be a rally at Queen's Park. It's going to be at noon on rebuild and improve public health care, no cuts to privatization. And it's organized by the Ontario Health Coalition and the OFL. I think this is going to be a big one. This is going to be a good activity to actually reach out to other activists from across the region and across the province. So come out to that.
Okay, yes, Baron.
Kind of an announcement. I just want the chair and the meeting to recognize that we have with us today the only socialist candidate for city council who's running in Etobicoke North in the 25-seat system that Doug Ford imposed on us. Peter DeGavin.
You made a comment about local election addressing certain issues, and one of the issues that's not getting addressed, it's getting addressed, but no real solution is being offered. One of the solutions, like when I'm running in Etobicoke North, is working with tenants, offering a rent freeze for 4 years. And it's not just a policy that we talk to tenants and we take a petition with us. So for asking them to get behind this campaign. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do a little bit differently in Etobicoke North. So running a grassroots campaign, and this comes out, and as I said, working with community groups is important. We worked with ACORN in North Kipling, and we're working with other tenants associations group. So we're working behind them and trying to get their issues across in this election. And so there's a petition that'll be, I'll leave it at the front desk for people to sign, and it's the rent freeze petition. And thanks.
Thank you.
Just mention, we could also use a few bucks from your pockets to go towards our campaign in Etobicoke. Just if you could just spare some change, please. Our poor little campaign.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to go to the Q&A. So each person has up to 3 minutes to ask a question or make an intervention. We'll take about 3 questions, and then I will come back to the panel and give them all of them, or whoever wants to answer the questions. Okay? So go ahead, brother.
Okay. I have two questions. They're different questions, or I might just be limited to just one of those questions.
No, you got up to 3 minutes. You can say what you want.
Okay. From the standpoint of general strike, I heard a general strike to me is a very good idea. It has a lot of impact. But among the participants in a general strike, some will be union members when a collective agreement is in effect. In that case, legally, are you in a good position to support a general strike without being penalized because of the collective agreement being in effect? The other question relates to back to work legislation. The QB Local 3903, Doug Ford didn't hesitate to legislate those people back to work, and with his reputation and his personality of feeling toward the labor movement, how would anybody plan to do something when I think people feel that with Doug Ford, an employer could simply sit there and perhaps propose nothing, stay away from the bargaining table, knowing full well that Mr. Ford will probably legislate anybody back to work who goes on strike. They're my two questions.
Thank you. Julius.
Thanks, folks, for an amazing presentation. Very good. You all addressed very different issues, but presented some very good examples of what's going on right now in the labor movement and the workers' movement, and challenges that we all face. Some of the examples, Sam had talked about his experiences in LBED. I should say that I'm on the OPSEU Executive Board. I've been on the board for about 1.5 years, so many of the things that have happened, examples in OPSEU have happened while I've been on the board. So I've been here. I've been a part of that. But the deal, what we see is a consistent approach by the leadership of the labor movement to prevent the true mobilizing and radicalization of the membership in the unions. The LBED, that whole campaign focused on precarious work, and it resonated with the public like I would never have thought it would have. The whole issue of the level of precarity, how much you're being paid, really people were identifying with that. Everybody was going to the LCBO. There was a lot of talk about how we're going to the LCBO, we're buying our alcohol, we're going on our long weekends, and these guys are being treated like shit. And instead of taking advantage of that sentiment, the leadership essentially forced the bargaining team to accept a shitty deal. 53% ratification across the province. 56, in this region, yeah, 56. In this region, the deal was ratified by a single vote. Yeah. A single vote out of all the members in this region. In Cat A, college academic, they had a fantastic campaign, and it was successful because they went against the status quo in our union, which increasingly has been rollover agreements. I work in the Ontario Public Service. I work for the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, and the entire OPS agreement was rolled over. College Support Service, I believe theirs was as well, and so were some folks in the hospital sector. They rolled over agreements that were set to expire for another 2 or 3 years, and their following agreements were rolled over. These actions put the membership to sleep. And now we're dealing with that. And now people who are activists involved in the labor movement are panicking because we're like, you guys, talking to leadership, you folks put the membership to sleep. And now all of their jobs are under threat. Everything that we fought for, issues of equity, issues of justice, Bill 148, all these things are up in the air. So now it's up to us to push the leadership. We need to do that. We're calling for an emergency Ontario Federation of Labour convention. We think that that would trigger a response from the membership, from the rank and file, to ask questions. Hey, why do we have this going on? And it will help build a movement that we need to build to fight for it.
Okay, we're going to take one more, and then we'll come back to the panel. Barry.
Yeah, so my name is Barry, and I'm with the Toronto Substitute Teachers Action Caucus in the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, and we've been hit heavily by concessions. I'll talk about that on the panel a little later this afternoon. But what a terrific panel this was. I mean, let's really give them a hand. The stories you told, the examples you drew, the lessons that you drew from your experience was really marvelous. Anna talking about an exemplary strike and about bridging the demographic or the generation gap was really fabulous. And Rajean, the erosion of trust affecting young workers, and why don't we see more young workers here? I think we see a few more just came in the last half hour, but the point remains valid, and it's not a mystery. It's not a mystery why young workers feel alienated from our union movement, and it's our union movement. It doesn't belong to the union bureaucrats. It belongs to us. We just don't control it. That's the problem. And the reason is very clear: two-tier wages and benefits. It's like slapping young workers in the face every time you ask them to come to a union meeting. Come to the meeting, but we won't treat you as equals. In fact, you will suffer discrimination systematically. Slap, slap again. This is not acceptable. and spaces like this is relatively open to local grassroots organizing, but that's not true for all union halls. And even here it's contested. So we need to see much more of that. And you know, the point that Barry made, well, Sam set the stage, I think, wonderfully in terms of the opening remarks. But I want to come to what Barry said and leave you all with a question. Empowering people. If we're going to take control of our unions and stop the pell-mell rush to concessions and more losses that we will endure in terms of job security, in terms of basic wages and benefits, that we need to take power in the unions. And I think the way to do that is to organize chapters of WAM in every workplace, in every union where we possibly can, and to run candidates against the leadership. To run candidates like Barry did at the OFL, but at the local level as well. And that's going to awaken people who are looking for leadership, who are hungry for an alternative to the giveaways coming from the top down. Do you agree?
In the next round, I'll come back to you, brother. Yeah. Before I go back to the panel, only because I've sort of faced this or learned about it in my union, the postal workers, to answer to your question, from my point of view anyway, in my union, brother, that if you're in the midst of negotiations or something to do with a strike in your workplace, and if a general strike was called, what could you do, or how it would affect you? Well, you just wouldn't pick at your own workplace. You'd go everywhere else and do it, and it wouldn't affect you. Okay? So you could, like, you go to another place, and you just wouldn't do it in front of your workplace, so that wouldn't affect the negotiations or whatever was going on. That's what we learned to do anyway. I mean, of course, you could go to your workplace as long as you're wearing a balaclava and covered up so nobody recognizes you. And believe you me, we've done that.
I've got extras.
There you go.
We've done that, and I know the chair doesn't get to speak very much, but I just want to put a little humor into this. I remember in the days of action, CUPW couldn't do anything in their own workplace, so a lot of us went to our own workplace, but we wore balaclavas. And so one of our sisters on the line wasn't feeling well, so she asked me if I could try to get a taxi for her. So I went down to the street, and I'm hailing cabs. The cab comes up and it takes off. Second cab comes up, it takes off. So finally, Brother Sid Ryan, as a matter of fact, come to me and says, Sister Vice, maybe if you took off your balaclava, the taxi So anyway, just a little joke. Okay, so you have up to 3 minutes each to answer all or whatever question you want to, and we will start with Barry.
Okay, so I think I want to address the general strike thing. I think it's something we need to start building up towards, but we need to start small. We don't have like the community support, and we don't have people that understand direct action. So it's looking at your community of, one, if a general strike comes, what is going to cause the most economic harm to the government? What is going to cause the most effect to the current government? In Hamilton, we're lucky enough that we have a port that has a lift bridge. The steel workers took it over once during their lockout. I say this is lucky because this actually doesn't disrupt the regular working class folks that you're trying to actually improve conditions for everybody. They're still able to drive across that bridge. And in fact, they don't have to stop because it's never going up. What it does do is stop rigs from getting in and out and industry from making capital. So it's a win-win for us. That doesn't exist in every community. So maybe, you know, in Toronto, you want to shut down a certain area, but you're going to get a lot of blowback. So it's building over the next coming years of small actions places and like getting out and doing the leafleting, doing the work in the neighborhood to say like we're doing an action coming up and building that community support. I think it's really needed so that when we do it, it's successful and it builds people's confidence, because I think that's the other thing is, one, it should be noted, everybody has a role to play and no role is worth more or less than the other. So recognizing that if you don't have the privilege, like I do of myself as a white male, to actually like block traffic, that role isn't more important than any other. So ensuring that when we look at how we're going to organize this, that there is roles for everybody to play, so that it can be successful. You know, same thing along the lines, if they rule your work site back to work, I mean, my honest opinion is, fuck it, we stay out anyways. Like, this government doesn't get to bully us around. I don't believe in electoral politics anyways as an anarchist. But that said, they have 40% of the vote. That's not the majority.
Far from it.
Far from it. So they don't get to fucking bully us around and say, like, that's what the people want. That's not what the people want. That's 40% of probably crusty old white men that want that. You know? Not happening. You rule us back to work. Go fuck yourself. We're staying out anyways. And we need to come as a movement and start paying the legal cost for it and standing behind it and then getting folks out in front of
30
there
seconds.
To do it. With the thing for, you know, for how do we empower people, do not be afraid to fail. Do not be afraid to get 17% of the vote.
Yeah.
Run again. Try again. Encourage folks to do it and keep at it. There's nothing wrong with failing. And you may have a bad idea at once. Try something different or tweak that. But we have to encourage each other to keep running, and we have to encourage each other to put ourselves into these places where we take charge of our own unions and we take charge of our own movements.
Thank you. Sam?
Yeah, just Alan's comment. So general strike and a collective agreement in effect, the extra legalities, you got government repression, you know, Doug Ford is a bully, he wants a confrontation. Like, how do we even begin to imagine something like this, right? You know, how do we extrapolate up? Calling for a general strike, I mean, in itself, you know, we all get to engage in a bit of hyperbole in the sense when we have these attacks raining down on us, but what it would look like is a convention of the OFL where members decide and members collectively get together, and maybe we would decide on some sort of rolling days of action, right? Where we have certain days where everyone is out in Ontario, right? Or maybe we decide to put it off for a bit and develop a campaign within our unions, right? There's different outcomes that could come out of an OFL convention where rank and file members get together and discuss these things, discuss the threats in our movement, and devise a plan. You know, we hear a lot, like the labor leadership is getting together and they're thinking about what to do, but fundamentally, you know, they're very almost disconnected from this fight, right? And one gets the sense, I mean, if we see stuff like right to work start to come about, you get a sense then the labor leadership will mobilize and say, everyone out, you know, this is a threat against all of us and our whole existence. Well, members have been getting laid off and having attacks on their collective agreements and losing direct tangible things throughout this process, throughout the $6 billion in efficiencies that are going to come down, right? So it might be too little too late when right to work laws actually come in and the labor leadership tries to mobilize the membership, right? So it's about, you know, like Rajean was talking about with tuition fees, you know, people saying, well, how can we even imagine this? But once you put the campaign out there and fight for it, people start coming out of the woodwork who agree with that idea. People start coming out of the spaces that they've been pushed to by these conservative elements, and you can kind of organize and imagine for something different, right? Just a couple other comments. I mean, the moves to break unions, right, and take on strikes, and what the matter the costs. And previously, we had the employer class; they were willing to give a little, right, for labor peace, and now they are looking to break our strikes, break labor at all costs. There's a huge power dynamic involved, right? So whenever you see the other aspect of it, you know, we had someone say, "Well, I would have done the same thing in terms of Kathleen Wynne, the college strike," right? And that was sort of what we heard from the leadership in that respect. So whatever, in terms of, you know, we might end up with this, not the CA you wanted, but enforcement is part of the organizing approach. And Anna, you said you guys are a conservative bunch. You're being modest, I think, for the college sector. You guys are some of the most activist-based unions, yeah, activist-based sector in OPSEU. You continually led the charge, right? So there's a connection between divisions between workers and tiers and solidarity while on strike, right? And reactivating the members, but having an eye on what a bigger fight back could look like. And just with my last, I want to give a shout out to Julius R. Scott. He deals with a lot of crap in his position at OPSEU, and it takes a lot of tenacity to go into those meetings and continually be attacked for your activities and who you are. And I just want to give a shout out to Julius for the work he does.
So I'm going to respond to some pieces of what was said. 3903 was legislated back, we were legislated back. In neither of those two instances did the employer actually bargain anyway, right? Our College Employer Council was basically absent at the table. Even when they were at the table, York had a strategy of non-bargaining long before they even began bargaining. So bargaining and strikes may be about more than just a collective agreement going forward. I think certainly in terms of what we got out of our strike, we didn't get great improvements in conditions. In fact, some of the things we were hoping for, we lost effectively. But what we did get was solidarity in our workplaces, a sense of deep-seated grievance articulated in a very clear way, understanding of the class dynamics at play here between management and us. Colleagues who are very, very cautious to say anything ever contrarian now perceive management as oppositional to the best interests of students and faculty. So the sort of larger gains of the strike are well beyond a collective agreement or being legislated back. So I think it is still a strategy we should pursue. It may not get us the outcomes we want, but it's still a very useful strategy. In terms of a general strike, well, at our last 15 in Fairness Faculty Caucus meeting, we decided if Bill 148 gets canceled, we're going on a general strike. Not gonna happen. We'd like it to happen, it's not going to happen because, and I think this is what Barry said, we need to actually lay the groundwork for it. Yeah. We are a long way away from that, but it is something that we do need to seriously consider. Our division, specifically, our bargaining is governed by a specific act, College's Collective Bargaining Act, which would penalize us, I believe it's $10,000 per day per worker for wildcat strike. Try to let them enforce it. Yeah. Is really how our divisional leadership now feels about it. So there is actually an appetite for that, at least from the leadership. Now we have to mobilize the membership.
Right on.
Okay, these are all really good questions. The piece about power, I think is really important. I think that there needs to be like a remembrance that the power actually belongs to everyone. And I think that we have to move away from thinking about direct action as just rallies and marches and this kind of thing. For me, direct action is anything when we take, when we directly act in political situations. And I think that what that might mean in a Ford government where we know that there's going to be cuts to social services, where there's already been cuts to social services that people depend on, is recognizing that the government doesn't hold all the power, that people hold power, and that we need to replace those services. We've seen like very incredible organizing, like in my youth coming up, like the Black Panther Party was something that I actively looked towards, and so we know that we have successful models of just replacing the services that are disappearing. That if we, like in this conversation about sex ed curriculums, I'm surprised that there isn't like I think that it's important to battle that, but why aren't we just starting public education about sex ed curriculum? Like, why aren't we doing consent education in the streets and those kind of things? I think that we need to not wait for government action or inaction, that we need to just circumvent that whole conversation and recognize that all of us have tools and powers and abilities to be able to bring to the table, both as collectives but also as individuals. And so I think like a part of it is also just being a little bit more creative and stepping a little bit outside of your comfort zone in what you think activism looks like, and start servicing people in their communities, because that's what we're losing. Like when these cuts come, they come to like frontline service workers, they come to social workers, they come to these kind of folks. Like we need to think about housing solutions for people. We need to think about like making sure that we're supporting folks that are food insecure and that are literally don't have enough to be able to make ends meet. And we have some like really amazing people. We have some folks in the room right now that are championing these issues, but as people, like when we're looking towards campaigns like Sorona's campaign, like listening to what community members listening to what community members are talking about, and figuring out how we fill those gaps, like how we like take the money out of our pockets if we have them and do that. How do we take the time out of our day? How much time in our day goes towards replacing these services and making sure that we're showing up for people. We can't just be passive. I think like a general strike is definitely like where we should get to, but that like shouldn't be the goal. That is one tactic, and I think the groundwork is about making sure that everybody has security, that everybody feels safe, that everybody feels like they can put themselves on the line to be able to get there. And I think that we get there by organizing community kitchens, about taking care of people's kids, about ensuring that people have housing. Very, very simple. Yeah, those are some of the more fundamental things.
Back to the floor. Yes, I have one speaker. Anybody else got their? Okay, Lloyd.
Yeah, I just wanted to really double down on the community kitchen. I'm houseless right now, and I'm living amongst a lot of people in West Bloor and throughout the city over the summer and June, including beaches, where there's tons of people who have been sleeping rough, and it's been increasing radically over the summer. And so I do my best to pay these folks with the kind of respect that they deserve. Hello, good morning, how are you? Are you doing well? And have a conversation with as many of these folks as I can. And I'm noticing so many more people falling down to the street, couples, families. They're seeking shelter and services, but the services that are available, for someone like me, I'm disabled carpenter, I can't have limited work I can actually do physically, and so, I'm on OW, but, I have to go through several burning hoops of fire to get disability, so you gotta do that, and take care of all that, but the reality is that one of the things that I discovered over time was how food not just helps people who are falling down to the street and need that help, but how food and regular food, like being there for them on a regular basis, with a good community kitchen, even if it's outdoors and crispy pits. I've seen it in the United States quite a bit, and it's just been a fantastic result. People get lifted up, they get active, they get out of their desperation mindset, and they join a community. But the food situation is one of those things where it's not just for the people who need the food, it's for people to come in and have some food with some people who do need food and create a normal social situation. And that's gaining a normal social situation, you can create psychology in which people can transcend a more activist mentality and drive their emotion towards something productive, as opposed to
30 seconds.
Themselves, falling down the street and shaming themselves for this happening to them. So I would really like the left to really focus on these community kitchens. It does work to bring in people. You never know who you're going to find homeless in Toronto or New York or Boston or LA. You never know.
Thank you. Corey?
On the CBC the other day, they went to Hamilton to talk about the unaffordability of housing in that city and in our city in Toronto. And the mayor of Hamilton was actually on the radio, and he said we need to look at kind of what to do with the unemployable, right? Because if you look at society, I mean, you see a lot of buzzwords around jobs, around rents, around minimum wage and stuff. But it's really about do we have a community? Do we have a society? And how do you sort of change that conversation to be like, how do we include all these people, that maybe cannot make money, maybe they're not able to have a profitable business or whatever, right? But is that really the model that we want to have? Do we want to have everyone going in that direction to just simply make profit, to make money in a very kind of cutthroat society where we're all kind of separated from each other? So on what Lloyd said and what you said about sort of bringing communities together, I mean, we really need to look at that and ask ourselves the tough questions, ask society the tough questions, is where are we going, right? With sort of this model that we have. And I think you guys made some great points, and just want to add that to that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Judy?
Yeah. In the 30s, there was a Teamsters union in Minneapolis, which was a really revolutionary union. It was led by revolutionaries, and it did a lot of, it even had an effect on the city as a whole, and it did a lot of very important things which everybody can learn from. So it's possible to have a revolutionary union.
Certainly is, Judy. Okay, before I close the list, is there somebody that hasn't spoken would like to speak now? Now's your chance. No? Okay, so I'm going to come back to the panel. I'll give them up to 5 minutes each to answer questions and do a wrap-up. And we will start with Anna, Rajean, Barry, and Sam. So, Anna?
I actually don't have much to contribute on these issues, except to listen. So I'm going to pass the floor on to the next person.
Okay.
To be modest.
Brother Rajean?
Just another, like, I don't know, I'm just saying the same things. We ran a community kitchen. We're trying to start one back up. I go to Ryerson, so we do it at Ryerson. We feel like we can't get kicked out of that space, but it's open to anybody. So if you live in the downtown core, come join us on Wednesdays.
Where's that?
On Wednesdays at Ryerson on Gould Street.
Which building?
Outside.
Okay.
Yeah, for the student center. So we're starting back up. We ran like a breakfast program. But the thing that shocked me the most was how easy that was to do. We fed on average around 300 people, sometimes over that, off of like $100, $150 each meal. That money definitely exists in this room. Like putting some resources together, like the folks that I worked with, we were employed at the food bank on campus. We have elected I'm just gonna say it, like a pretty regressive students union that I hope they continue to prioritize that work, but I'm not holding my breath. And so we've talked amongst ourselves about, like, this work was really important to us, we're gonna continue to do it, and like we're looking for funding, looking for people to talk to be able to make that happen, but we also just recognize that, like, out of the little money that we have, we're able to like put in like $25 and try to feed 50 people. Like that means a lot, right? And that starts the conversation. That's what gets momentum going. And so I would just urge people, and I think that as definitely as academics, but as people on the left and people in labor, one of the trends that I've seen is that we like to overthink things and use a ton of huge words to be able to describe what we mean, but it really is simple. It really is just about having the attention, reframing what you think justice is and what that looks like, and committing to that. That, yeah, there's nobody that you need to convince to join you. They'll join you when their time comes. Yeah.
Brother Barry?
So Eisenberger used to, he led the campaign to privatize our water in Hamilton years ago, which was successful, and then led to boil water advisory alerts, which we then eventually took back in-house and cost us millions to do the upkeep that no private corporation ever did. So fuck him. I think housing is a human right, and everybody should have access to respectable housing. How we achieve that, I don't actually know. But I take insult from a mayor making those comments about, yeah, these folks that aren't working. Like, everybody has different issues, and they all need to respect it, and regardless if you can work or not, like, you deserve a respectful life. I think looking at some of the stuff around that, around housing, around food stuff, locals have to look at how they can fight for stronger language and collective agreements that work outside of the box traditionally. So, as a municipal worker for the city of Hamilton, one of the things we tried to bargain last round was that any new building being built have gender neutral washrooms. We were not successful in that, but I think coming up we have folks that do maintenance on Hamilton housing buildings. So maybe it's bargaining language that says we have to provide more housing. We have parks departments, so we have lots of land that we maintain. Maybe it's looking at bargaining language where the city gives over X amount of acreage to the local to run community gardens, where then we play a small part in providing free food back to the community and back to different organizations like yourself that are actually doing something productive. I think that's different things that you have to look at within, if you are unionized, of what are outside of the box things you can try to bargain for and entrench those rights in your collective agreement that you can use to make a difference in the community.
Okay, Sam?
Thank you again, everyone, for coming. What does justice look like, right? And raising the floor for all workers. You know, it's essentially when we storm heaven and we organize the most marginalized among us and the working class to basically win real gains. And this can come in a variety of forms. But if you look at something like 15, it was a small group of community activists who organized and fought and won, right? And they were initially given a little bit of seed money by the OFL under a different presidency, right? And there's been a fight ever since by activists to gear resources to that struggle. And you know, in OPSEU we had a big fight trying to get funding to 15 and put those resources behind and making leaflets and having rallies and coordinating actions to add to this movement. But it wasn't necessarily funded throughout the whole structure. And I don't want to say our movements were only confined to Region 5, but there was definitely that aspect, right? So, I mean, a lot of activists are turned away in this sense when they see sort of the infighting. I remember my first OPSEU convention, there was some political firings, it was a war zone, the convention was stopped, right? You know, in terms, you probably remember that craziness, right? So we come into these spaces and you have to, and young workers and activists really have to find their space, right? And part of that is organizing rank and file caucuses to open up this space. We are organizing a Region 5 flying squad that WAM will very much be a part of in terms of grouping a set of people together to be anywhere in terms of offering solidarity picket lines and other people that are, you know, fighting on various fronts, right? The housing issue, I mean, I know at OPSEU local, I think at Mohawk College, Kevin McKay's local, they supported the rent strike. So this is a great development, right, in terms of other ways the labor movement can implement this. I remember when we were at the Landlord and Tenant Board, and despite having our members in there, Corey Weir was leading the Parkdale rent strike, and yeah, myself and our regional vice president Miles Magner, we went right in there. We shut down the board with the rest of the activists there that day. And even it could be political because yeah, we had members there, but those are the choices you have to make, and you have to kind of, you know, push the boundaries on what is possible and what is legalistically permitted, right? Community-based work, self-help. I mean, it's the offering services is crucial, but also building consciousness. You know, we work within the NDP and labor unions because that's what the working class is, and that's where we feel we can make the most gains. For instance, the Socialist Caucus within NDP, we pushed housing as a fundamental human right, and it was verified in various statements of the NDP last convention, right, as cooperative housing and social housing is a fundamental human right. But unfortunately, it is one of the aspects of our society that's based off profit, right? So battling the dominant narratives, but also fighting for transitional demands, things that the working class can get a hold of and that aren't necessarily possible without revolutionary change, but something, things that are very tangible, like 30 for 40, basically. Some 30 hours, full-time jobs at 30 hours would create millions of jobs across North America, distribute the work, right, with no loss in pay and benefits. But these are something that is asinine to the ruling class, and they cringe whenever you mention these things, but they're very practical, right? So yeah, and that just, I'll end off, unions not necessarily ends in themselves, but unions as vehicles for class struggle and achieving gains. I think we really reformulate, you know, what we do on the left and realize there is no competition, it's all collaborative. We can't create boxes and necessarily act like, oh, this union stole our members throughout organizing drive. I mean, there's thousands of workers at Walmart and Tim Hortons and McDonald's that need to be organized. Oh, how do we do that? Well, you know, we're not going to do that without any ideas and bringing young workers in. So that's just all under there. And I'll back at Ryerson this semester, so I'll see you there on Wednesday, Rajean. I'll definitely be by to take part in that. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I just want to end stand up by saying just a few words myself. I've really enjoyed what the panel had to say, and I've learned a lot from them. And I believe you, brother, when you say, you know, there's no shame in failing, and that's very true. The shame is in that trying.
Yes, yes.
We need to build solidarity. We need to build solidarity member to member. We need to build solidarity union to union. We need to build solidarity union to communities, because you know we were all either workers, are workers, or will be workers. Okay, you know, and in my union, you know, solidarity is very, very important. We believe it's the Postal Workers Union for those who came in late. And in my union, and because it's my union, but it's the truth, we believe in solidarity. We believe an injury to one is an injury to all. We believe that a picket line is a picket line. So much so it's in our Constitution that if you got a picket line up and we cross it, and you call the union and let them know that they've done it, you will become a member in bad standing. And a good example of that, a few years ago when OPSEU was out on strike, and some of the buildings had multiple employers in their building, you know, not just OPSEU members. So the truck would pull up. It would pull up in front of the building or go into the lot where they unload things. And the postal worker would invite a couple of OPSEU members into the truck and show them the government mail and the rest of the mail. And he would deliver the rest of the mail. And when he came back with the mail, he would show that he had no government mail, because he knew that you know, this is what we believe in. So I think more unions could learn from that. So anyway, on that note, I know I'm praising my own union, but the truth is the truth. So I thank everybody for coming, and I hope you're going to be back here again yes, I'll go to Julius at 4, and I'll let Julius carry on from there. Do you want to?
Yeah, just really briefly, folks, don't go too far, because this afternoon's session is going to be fantastic. And we really want to come out of this. This is not just a talk shop. I mean, I really enjoyed the presentations. They brought so much, and I think a lot of us learned. But we actually want to come out of this conference with a plan. And we're not going to burden you folks with a massive amount of work. That's not what this is about. But we do want to come out of this with some form of action, because if we don't do it, I'm afraid to say that nobody else is going to do it. At least it doesn't appear that way at this point. Okay? So go grab something to eat or drink and be back for 4 o'clock, and we'll continue. And Saren, supposed to show Saren's here as candidate for Saren will be speaking on the next panel along with Sid Ryan, former president of the OFL, Bryn Sinclair Waters from Pfeiffer 15 and QP 1281, and Barry Weisletter will also be speaking on the panel. I'll see you soon.
I'll see you. That's great.
I got to return to the campaign office, so
Yeah. If you have time, pop by around the corner. Anna.
it'll be online.
That's what I was going to say. I'm sure I'll be checking in, especially if there's sort of action items to come up next.
Yeah.
And I'll be following up on that.
Oh, I don't even think we got that last minute. We didn't even go live. It shut down and we ended. No, you got yours. Oh, so is that off now?
Yep.
It's still recording.
Oh, turn it off. There's no reason to protest.